What is good, everyone? Welcome in to this episode of the FAA Managers Association podcast on this December 12th, 2024. The year is wrapping up, and we had plans to bring you a more of a legislative recap for 2024, which we're going to get into, but literally maybe 15 minutes before hitting the record button, we have breaking news coming from Politico that FAA Administrator Mike Whitaker will resign. And who better than to talk about this with me to give you frankly, the impacts that we had from this awesome gentleman in the very short term. But I have with me Mr. Ron Arentano from the Normandy Group. He is also our FAMA Executive Director. Ron, big stuff coming out of basically from everywhere. We're still looking to see, whether or not this is going to be factually true. Again, the news can report anything, but Politico usually is pretty spot on with this one, isn't it?
It sure is, Keith, and thanks for having me here today. Yeah, what a morning to be on the show with you. It is not necessarily unique in the sense of a new presidential administration coming in wanting to set their people up for certain administration posts, but Mr. Whitaker, Mike Whitaker, was just confirmed about a year ago for a 5-year term as the FAA administrator. So this is a little unique that he decided to resign effective on inauguration day, which is January 20th, 2025. And so it definitely has kind of caught everybody off guard somewhat. There was actually a few congressional hearings this week just on the implementation of the FAA reauthorization bill and a few other key issues that Congress has been tracking with the FAA. So I know a number of them are kind of caught off guard, and I've heard from a few congressional offices already this morning that they weren't quite sure where this came from, but certainly it's an interesting development. It sounds like it certainly is accurate, as you stated earlier. Politico is typically pretty accurate with these things. So once again, the FAA will find itself in an interim type position for the time being. So we'll have to see post January 20th where the new administration, where the President-elect Trump goes in terms of a nominee for the next FAA administrator. And then, of course, that person will need to go through Senate confirmation process, which isn't always easy. If you recall, in the Biden administration, Phil Washington was initially nominated early in Mr. President Biden's term, but it languished for about 18 months before he eventually withdrew his nomination and came to Mr. Whitaker. So we went with about 18 months with interim leadership at the FAA, as many of our members are well aware. So hopefully we're not looking at another situation like that. We'll look forward to seeing what the incoming Trump administration has in mind in terms of a replacement for Mr. Whitaker. He's been a good partner with FAMA over his year or so in this role, and hopefully we can continue that with his successor.
Yeah, it really, when you think about what Mr. Whitaker had in, one of the main impacts was the fatigue mitigation, which is still ongoing in implementation, which I remember in April, we were all sort of, whoa, look at this. But that was one thing I remember, I'll actually vividly remember from him, was putting that piece into motion. But yeah, the main impact, I think, as you said, we were under interim leadership, and we honestly now between administrations, safe to say it's going to take a little bit of time before we know what the administration will do.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I suspect, to the Trump administration's credit, they have moved in other facets of the federal government with other agencies. They have nominated people at record speeds and have already started the process probably earlier than any other administration I can recall in my 30 plus years working in Washington. That being said, there's a lot of moving parts as it comes, when it comes to the nomination process and making your way through the Senate, and considering how fresh this news is from Mr. Whitaker deciding to step down on January 20th. I suspect it'll be some time. We may see some names thrown around here in the next week. Formal nomination probably won't come until, I would say, with the holidays upon us, maybe after the holidays. But, you never know. It could come before then. All that being said, nothing can really occur until the new administration is sworn in on January 20th. So I think we're looking at least for a couple months with an interim in place. And we'll see how that goes and who that person will be.
Yeah, but we will of course keep you posted as we get word out. And we can at least talk about one nominee in particular for the Department of Transportation. That's that one, as you said, there were a lot of nominees that came in, but we have one, at least one that we know about.
Yeah, absolutely, Keith. Yeah, so obviously the FAA falls under the umbrella of the larger U.S. Department of Transportation. They oversee everything from aviation to roads and bridges to rail to transit. Um, and over the past 4 years, the Secretary of Transportation has been Pete Buttigieg. Obviously, with an administration change, we have a new nominee there, and it's Sean Duffy. It was nominated by President-elect Trump to be the next Secretary of Transportation. Mr. Duffy, somewhat familiar in FAMA circles, just because he served in the House for roughly 8 years. Not so much in the transportation realm, but there was some overlap there, just because he comes from Wisconsin, which is pretty active in the aviation space. He's already been making the rounds, being shepherded around the hill as most nominees are at this time, trying to just build support for his nomination process for a vote next year. And so far, it's been pretty smooth sailing. I haven't heard, nor has anybody else really said that there are any concerns with his nomination, and he's likely to sail through the process early next year.
Yeah, which is we'll hopefully for that because I know one thing we were hoping for stability with the leadership, so we know where we're going to go in the future. But let's pivot a little bit and take a look at what that's today, obviously, and a little bit of tomorrow. But let's talk a little bit about 2024 and what we were able to accomplish. And one piece of legislation that was one that's been, frankly, I think about a year and a half in the making is FAA reauthorization. And we were that was part of the ledge team that came in, which was an awesome experience, and that was our main talking point was getting the reauthorization piece through.
Absolutely, Keith. Yeah. So every 5 years, as many of you may know, the FAA needs to be reauthorized for its various priorities and programs. And that bill was up at the end of this during this 2024. It had last been reauthorized at the end of 2018. So it was important to get this FAA bill reauthorized as quickly as possible. That process started roughly 2 years ago. It's a long process. The output's usually about a 2,000-page bill that covers everything from our world and air traffic to tech ops to UAS, and you can just go down the line of all the various issues that it covers. But we were asked to participate in that process very early by a lot of the key legislators that drafted that large bill. And throughout the entire process, they kept us surprised and kept our priorities in check. As you can imagine, there's a lot of folks who they're hearing from, who they're asking for input from. But we were, due to a lot of the outreach that we do legislatively, both here in Washington and then across the country through our legislative team, we were given a seat at the table to really try to make some progress on key issues for us. So some of those, most of those issues, certainly in this day and age, revolved around supervisor staffing shortages and the stressors that many of our members deal with on a daily basis due to those shortages. So we worked very closely with both House and Senate leadership, and at the end of the day, we were able to get a number of successes in the bill. There was a joint aviation employment training working group that is going to have a supervisor presence on it. We were able to get the requirement of a frontline manager workload study to assess all the challenges that are posed by staffing shortages. And then there's a transportation research board that was set up to develop a new controller workforce plan. So a lot of cool things that were included in there at our behest. At the end of the day, the bill passed probably as bipartisan as any large bill in this super partisan Congress. The Senate passed it by a vote of 88-4. The House passed it by a vote of 387-26. So a cool little tidbit Keith had mentioned earlier that the legislative fly-in for FAMA, which happens once a year during the late spring, just so happened to fall during the time when the House was doing the final vote on this legislation. So we got to sit in the House gallery and cheer on its passage. So it's a 5-year bill, and it'll govern now until 2029, where we'll have to get back in the process again and try to continue to improve things for FAMA and our members.
Yep, and that was the big piece. We've been pushing that in the house. I mean, just being again, seeing that process, it was really, one fun. I shouldn't say fun. I'm sorry. One awesome thing. Let's just go in that word. Is the relationships we have with both political parties. I was able to see it firsthand, to where it doesn't matter it's a Republican or a Democrat representative. We're talking to everyone that wants to hear us and listen, and the individuals on the TNI were it was really just an awesome experience to see. Wow, yeah, we're forge ahead with everyone that will have our that will listen, which is great. But reauth again, that was the big one. But we had some other legislative stuff that went through. Do you want to talk about that?
Well, certainly. I mean, I think one of the things we always kind of track during our our time in Washington each and every year. It's just concerns about government shutdowns. It's constantly a concern for our members, for all federal employees, frankly. And we constantly are engaging with all these members of Congress. Keith, you'd mentioned our bipartisan relationships, and they are vast. And I've had the opportunity to work with FAMA for over 15 years, and can tell you we're as bipartisan as an organization as there is. We work very well with Republicans, Democrats, and you kind of need to in this environment where things can change very quickly. But some of the other things that we, really focused on this year were trying to make sure there were no government shutdowns. There was a lot of standoffs. There's a lot of instability in the House, particularly, but also in the Senate. And multiple times we engaged our legislative team to do outreach, particularly in the early part of the year, to avoid any government shutdown. So we're proud that we were able to, play a part in stopping that. And unfortunately, the reality of Washington these days, and it is so closely divided. No matter how elections turn out, most margins are pretty slim. You have to be vigilant about communicating to members the impacts of those shutdowns. I know a lot of our members still look back on the shutdown of 2019 and really have nightmares about it. So it's important upon to tell these members what that means, why you got to avoid this, how can we stop this in the future. So we've worked on a couple pieces of legislation to prevent those shutdowns, ways to keep the FAA open in the event of any potential future shutdown. So we'll continue to do that into the future, and probably for the next decade or so, frankly, just because of the reality of our political situation.
Yeah, but you want to talk about razor sharp majorities. This one is definitely, I personally never remembered seeing. I can't remember the number. Is it a 2 seat margin right now that Republicans hold in the House? I mean, there were some contests that were called very late. What is the number that they have in the House? Because that definitely is.
It is Keith. You're absolutely right. So the final number technically is 435 members of the House, 220 in this Congress, in the upcoming Congress, the 119th Congress. 220 will be Republican and 215 will be Democrat. However, the incoming Trump administration has nominated three sitting members of the House for positions in the new administration. So several of them have resigned to seek these positions. So that really leaves at least until special elections can be scheduled, and the earliest one can be scheduled is, and two of these members are from Florida, is on April 1st. So for the first 3.5 months of or even 4 months of this administration, they're going to have a House majority of 217 to 215, which is indeed a 1 seat majority. So to get anything done, they're going to either have to, the House Republicans will need to keep everybody on the same page, which was very difficult as we saw in this past Congress, or solicit some Democratic support to come over for various initiatives that they may push. And with any incoming administration, you've got a lot of priorities, a lot of things they want to hit the ground running. You always hear about the first 100 days in a new administration, and the incoming Trump administration is no different. They've got some grand plans, so it will be interesting. But it is, to your point, historical. It is by far the smallest majority that the House has had since 1930. 32, I want to say the 1932 election was the last time they had this slim of a majority. And ironically enough, quick historical fact, at that time the Republicans had a 2 seat majority, and then over the course of that Congress, 14 different members passed away, and the majority swung from Republicans to Democrats. So it's funny how those kind of
Whoa.
things can happen. But yeah, but it just goes to show you the tenuous nature of such small majorities.
Absolutely. And yeah, I've had a few people ask me, about what they think is going to come and everything. My response has been, it's early. What happened in 2016 to 2020, we saw some things. We saw, a ATC privatization that was put in works. I think Schedule F was another thing that got put in place. But my response has been, it's way too early. We're it's you don't know what's going to happen this time around. We'll wait and see. And then honestly, like right now, the big one was, as we mentioned, the administrator. We're looking for another one, which is going to be probably more impactful right now. So anyways,
Uh, Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, just to follow up on your comment there, I mean, certainly it is early. You have some inklings of what they might like to do, maybe more broadly, but certainly nothing FAA specific that really has been brought to the forefront. There's been a lot of talk a little bit about what happens with commercial space, given some of the larger benefactors that are involved with the Trump campaign. You have this new Department of Government Efficiency run by Elon Musk, and Vivek Ramaswamy. They've got some ideas on how to shrink the federal footprint. What does that mean? Are we talking headcounts? Are we talking moving some offices around, efficiencies? They technically do not have statutory authority to do a lot, but they can certainly influence members of Congress to adhere to some of their perspectives. So it's going to be a little bit of give and take. I think there's some grand plans that will be met with the realities of the federal bureaucracy, and like anything, it'll probably be met somewhere in the middle, and we'll see what they come out with. But you're absolutely right; it's way too early to really speculate at this point.
Absolutely. And yeah, we're again looking ahead to that 2025. The first big thing that we have, the board of directors will be in Kansas City in a few weeks. That will be fun, particularly if the Chiefs make the playoffs. But yeah, I want to say that's our first big one. Obviously, we have our directors meeting in April. But do you want to give us any inclining before we sign off here on what we're looking forward to in 2025 and any of the priorities right now?
I think it's like anything in the way we look at it legislatively. You play some offense, you play some defense. You brought in football as an analogy, and last year with the FAA bill, really on the docket, we were playing offense. We were trying to get a lot of our priorities in there, and there will be new legislation coming down the pike where we're not even sure what it's going to look like at this point, but we'll want to play a prominent role, or at least some role in that process. And then there'll be some defense. I mean, there's a lot of talk about changes to the way the federal employee structure is laid out here, and so we'll work with a lot of groups. We have some relationships with other federal employee groups like ours in the manager and supervisor space, where we'll just monitor and if need be, weigh in to push back or to maybe provide a more proactive, positive impact on whatever may be coming out of the new administration. So it should be an interesting year. I mean, there's never a dull moment. Certainly the wild card now with a open administrator, at least for a period of time, was something a lot of people weren't anticipating. So we'll have to see. We'll have to see what comes down the pike. With the administration and the Congress, we mentioned the House having a small majority. The Senate majority is a little bit bigger, but it's only 53-47. They've got a couple, what you call moderate Republicans who work well with Democrats. So there will be some interesting things coming out of the Senate as well. So all good opportunities for FAMA to engage, and certainly it's important for I don't know, Keith, if you want to talk a little bit more about the importance of engaging, because the legislative team has been very effective. All of our successes, and I could go through a litany of them over the last decade, are due to that type of engagement. And it's so important for our members that want to get engaged to let us know, get involved in the process, and help us influence things.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of which, I will be getting Mr. David Vigil, who is our legislative guy. I know that he and I will be doing a video so that we can talk about, because for me, you guys made it so easy when I wanted to do engagement when I was chapter president in Southern California. And it is not as intimidating as some people thought. It was fun. And just, talking to just staff members, it really, you sort of saw. And then frankly, for me, it was one letter in and then it was one letter back, which I never would have thought of all the stuff that these, that our representatives are doing. That was really cool, actually getting something that was actually, it wasn't generic. It was actually pretty personal. And that was a really good feeling. And then down the road, bumping into, it's just awesome. Sorry, a little lost for words there, but the final thing that just where we are in December. Let's just talk about. We talked about shutdown real quickly. Uh, we haven't seen really like a red alert come out, even though we're looking at a CR, and that's to end off on that because coming up on Christmas, we don't see any real fire coming from a shutdown, even though I think we're a few days away from the current CR running out. But do you want to briefly touch on that before we get out of here?
Absolutely. Yeah. So to your point, yeah, we're currently operating on a continuing resolution that's funding the federal government through December 20th. They're wrapping up things in what's called a lame duck Congress. Congress comes back after the election, and it's called a lame duck because, members retire, members lose their elections, but they're still in Congress to wrap up for the year. And then the new Congress is sworn in on January 3rd. So they're operating on a continuing resolution until December 20th. All sides have agreed that, there's going to be need to be an additional continuing resolution for this FY25 process that takes us into that 2025. Right now, they're just trying to settle on dates. Frankly, I've heard everything. Most people say mid to late March. It's probably going to be late March, probably March 31st. Though they've been focusing on other priorities. Right now, they're wrapping up the NDA, the National Defense Authorization Act, and they'll move to this and then wrap things up next week. Yes, I've seen no indication or any concern that a shutdown is imminent. Certainly, we'll track. We're tracking closely. We'll continue to track closely. If that changes and we need a legislative action alert, we'll push it out to all of our members to engage with their members of Congress. But we don't see it being a problem right now. March is a different story. We need to track that closely. With such small majorities, it's going to be a little thorny on how they try to wrap things up. But again, that means the federal government, continue to operate under the previous year's funding levels through March 31st, if that is indeed the date. So I would just encourage our members to keep a lookout for messages from their leadership in FAMA of how things shake out in the next week. We'll certainly be pushing those out from here in Washington. And like I said, I don't see any issues, but something to always be mindful of. You never can count on Congress to make things easy. So we'll keep tracking.
Yeah, no, that sounds good, man. Hey, I really do appreciate you jumping on short notice, particularly with the news that broke this morning. Ron, thank you again for joining me here on this, giving us an update here, one of which I know that we want to do these kinds of things regularly, but also when they're impactful. So, Ron, thanks for taking time, stepping in front of me for this 20-odd minute talk. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah. Hey, that's going to do it for this video, everyone. On behalf of Mr. Mike Smith, our national president, your board of directors, regional directors, we really do appreciate everything you do on a daily basis. Until I step in front of you again on YouTube, have a happy holidays, and we are out. Adios.